Those of you who watched the last lesson, I was talking about in 1957, the Russians launched Sputnik, and the Department of Defense in America was really worried that they were going to start to launch missiles from space platforms, and there was a lot of paranoia going on. And that largely resulted in DARPA getting formed, the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency. And that resulted in ARPANET getting created, a packet switching network, which really was the beginnings of the internet. And you're probably wondering, why would a packet switched network be developed in response to a fear that the Russians were going to bomb us from outer space? And the answer to that is they wanted a communication network where you could knock out huge numbers of the nodes of the network and it would still function. And packet switch networking was the answer. Essentially, it has routing tables that learn more efficient routes and learn new routes based on things being destroyed. So that's the real answer to that question of why was ARPANET created in response to Sputnik being launched. To get to the subject of the lesson, which is what is XML. This is an example of an XML document. You'll notice that it has a declaration at the top that says less than question mark XML version equals 1.0 standalone equals yes. And quite often those declarations also have an encoding inside. And then it has a root element. Every XML document is like an HTML document, but it has to be better formed. It has to have open and closing tags for every tag. And it has to have a root element, which in this case is new data set. And then we have our first element, which is movie. And it has an ending tag, a slash movie. And then you have elements within the element, which is movie ID slash movie ID, the opening and closing tags, and that has a value of 1, genre ID slash genre ID, and that has a value of 1. And you'll notice this is essentially a tree structure. At the very top of the tree is the root element, or it's a rooted tree in that sense. And then we have our first top level element and then sub-elements under that. In fact, if the way this is portrayed, if I click on this, it'll show an ellipse rather than the sub-elements to show the tree can be expanded out. And then the second element on the same level of movie is genre. And that has tags of genre ID, a data value of 1, and a closing tag of slash genre ID. As this is, it's what's known as a well-formed XML document, and that it meets all the criteria of an XML document, open and closing tags. If you have an empty tag, you can have the tag name with the slash greater than, rather than having the two tags, just like HTML. But in order to be a valid HTML document, you also need either a DTD, or document type definition, or a schema. And the XML document usually has an extension of XML, and the schema, which has almost completely replaced the DTD, has an extension of XSD. So here's an example of the schema. And this is a graphical representation of the schema. You see the tree with the root, the two elements within the root, which are what are known as complex elements, because they're made up of sub-elements. And originally I generated this schema using Liquid XML Studio, the 30-day trial, because I can't really afford it. And these were all strings when I generated it. and some of them should be ints, so I changed the data type to int using the properties window down here. And I'll expand that out so you can see it a little better. I changed the type to int here. And in the pane below this, you can see what the actual generated schema values are. You have the names, and then you have a new data set, and then a type of complex type, and then an organization of sequence. You can have organizations like all, which means they can be in any order, and choice, where it means some of them can be missing, and so on. And then you have the elements, the top elements of movie, and this is also a complex type because it's made up of other elements, and it's a sequence ordering. And then you have the names of the other elements, like movie ID, and a min occurs equals 0 means you could leave it out. You can change that. You have both a min occurs and a max occurs, and so on. But generally, you don't have to learn all this stuff. You can find a tool that'll generate a schema from the XML document itself, and which also has a nice graphics version that you can add elements and delete elements within the graphics part of it, which makes it a lot easier to manipulate. You can also have things like attributes for tags instead of just data between tags, and you can have comments, which are the same as HTML comments, which are angle bracket, exclamation mark, dash dash, comment, and then a dash dash, close angle bracket, and so on. But we're keeping it pretty simple for this series of videos on interfacing XML with ADO.NET and ADO.NET objects. An XML document that has a schema or a DTD and they're all correct is called a valid XML document, and one that doesn't use a schema is called just a well-formed XML document. And for the ADO interfacing, we're going to use the schema, so technically we have a valid XML document. Well, I hope you learned a lot from this video, and remember to come back for the next one, where I'm going to actually start talking about the ADO.NET objects used interface to XML. Until then, remember to focus and learn a lot.